the vote that changed everything. The stellar hegemony's grand assembly hall stretched across 3 kilometers of crystallized space, its walls pulsing with the collective consciousness of 47 species. Each representative floated in their environmental pods, connected through neural links that translated thoughts across the biological divide. The vote was supposed to be routine. Earth, that blue marble spinning in the unfashionable Western spiral arm, had finally achieved faster-than-light communication. Protocol demanded immediate absorption into the hegemony before the primitives could develop anything dangerous. Ambassador Zelkath of the Vron extended his tentacles in what passed for amusement among his kind. The humans had sent mathematical proofs and music as their first messages to the stars. Music, as if the universe cared for their rhythmic noise. His species had conquered systems with gravitational weapons while humans still thought nuclear fission was impressive. The vote would be unanimous as always. Invasion, absorption, cultural dissolution within 3 cycles. The hegemony had refined this process over 10,000 years. The voting began with the ancient races, each pulse of agreement adding to the growing chorus of invasion. The Krell voted yes, their hive mind calculating resource extraction rates. The Thornari agreed, seeing new subjects for their biological experiments. One by one, 46 species cast their votes for Earth subjugation. Only the witness abstained, as was their eternal right as observers. The decision was final. Earth would be civilized. What the hegemony didn't understand was that they had just voted on something they couldn't comprehend. They saw Earth's broadcasts, its wars, its divisions, and mistook chaos for weakness. They counted our weapons and found them primitive. They measured our ships and found them slow. They analyzed our governments and found them fractured. Every measurement confirmed what they wanted to believe, that humanity was another easy conquest. But they never asked the right questions. They never wondered why a species that could have destroyed itself 1,000 times over had somehow survived. They never questioned why our fiction was filled with invasions we always seemed to win. They never considered that we had been preparing for them our entire existence. Commander Jiang Wei stood in the underground bunker beneath Cheyenne Mountain when the first message arrived. Not from deep space where humanity's telescopes watched, but from the moon. The hegemony had built a translation gate in 3 days, assembling it from particles that shouldn't exist according to human physics. The message was simple: a formal declaration of absorption, instructions for surrender, and promises of peaceful integration if humanity complied within 1 solar rotation. Jiang read it twice, then laughed. Not the nervous laugh of fear, but the deep belly laugh of someone who had just heard the universe's greatest joke. He turned to his staff, scientists and soldiers from 30 nations who had dropped everything when the gate appeared. They were supposed to panic. Instead, Jiang saw something else in their eyes: relief. Finally, the waiting was over. Finally, humanity had a real enemy instead of itself. The response Earth sent back wasn't what the hegemony expected. No surrender, no negotiation, no panic, just a single question that their translation matrices struggled to parse. Why should we? The Vron ambassador had to read it 3 times before the meaning sank in. These primitives were actually questioning the natural order of the galaxy. It was like bacteria questioning why it should be consumed by an organism. The absurdity of it made several species laugh in their various ways. The hegemony's second message was less polite. Submit or face the consequences. They included helpful videos of previous civilizations that had resisted. Worlds turned to glass, populations reduced to ash, entire systems converted into resource farms. The message was clear. Resistance meant extinction. Compliance meant survival, even if it wasn't truly living. Most species chose survival. Humanity's response came 12 hours later. It wasn't words this time, but actions. Every nuclear weapon on Earth, over 12,000 warheads launched simultaneously. Not at the moon, not at each other, but straight up into space where they detonated in a perfectly synchronized sphere around the planet. The electromagnetic pulse was visible from Mars. To the hegemony, it looked like mass suicide. To humanity, it was something else entirely. We had just burned our old weapons to make room for new ones. Dr. Sarah Chen watched the radiation readings from her laboratory in Shanghai. The detonations hadn't just been random. Each warhead had been positioned using calculations derived from studying the moon gate's construction. The explosions created a resonance pattern that human scientists had theorized but never tested. As the radiation waves intersected and amplified, something unexpected happened. The quantum foam around Earth began to vibrate at frequencies that matched human brainwaves. The hegemony's first invasion force arrived 6 days later. 3 dreadnoughts, each the size of Manhattan, emerged from translation gates expecting to find a dead world or a surrendering one. Instead, they found something impossible. Earth was gone. Not destroyed, not cloaked, simply not where it should be. In its place was a quantum probability field that their sensors couldn't penetrate. When they tried to enter it, their ships began to dissolve at the molecular level. The truth was more elegant than disappearance. Humanity had done something the hegemony thought impossible for a pre-singularity species. We had shifted Earth slightly out of phase with normal space-time. Not far, just enough to make physical interaction problematic. The planet existed in a quantum superposition, there and not there simultaneously. We could see out, but they couldn't see in. More importantly, we could reach out, but they couldn't reach us. Captain Maria Rodriguez commanded the first strike team that emerged from phase space. Her ship, cobbled together from a decommissioned space station and theoretical physics that shouldn't work, materialized inside the Vron dreadnought's shield bubble. The aliens had expected boarding parties or missiles. They hadn't expected humans to teleport directly into their life support systems with containers of Earth bacteria genetically modified to eat their specific biochemistry. The hegemony pulled back to regroup, sending urgent messages across their network. The primitives had somehow developed phase technology, something that had taken the Vron 3,000 years to discover. Worse, they were using it wrong, in ways that violated every safety protocol the hegemony had established. Humans were treating fundamental forces like toys to be played with, rather than dangers to be respected. Ambassador Zelkath called for an emergency assembly. 47 species gathered again, this time with confusion replacing certainty. The humans were supposed to surrender or die. Those were the only options the hegemony's 10,000-year history had ever provided. But humans had created a third option: resistance through transformation. We had changed the rules of the game while they were still trying to play it. The second invasion force was larger. 12 dreadnoughts, 30 cruisers, and enough firepower to crack a moon. They emerged from their gates to find empty space where Earth should be. Then the attacks began, not from ships or weapons platforms, but from space itself. Humans had learned to use phase space as a weapon, creating pockets of altered physics that turned the hegemony's own technology against them. Fusion reactors would suddenly operate at impossible efficiencies, overloading and exploding. Navigation computers would calculate that up was down and inside was outside. Lieutenant James Thompson led what the media called the Ghost Brigade, soldiers who had volunteered for consciousness transfer into quantum states. They existed as living probability waves, able to be anywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The hegemony's greatest minds couldn't understand how human consciousness could survive such a transformation. They didn't realize that humanity's greatest strength had always been our adaptability, not our technology. The Thornari tried biological warfare, releasing engineered plagues toward Earth's last known position. The diseases were masterworks of genetic engineering, capable of rewriting DNA while the host still lived. But when the plague clouds hit the probability field around Earth, something unexpected happened. The viruses evolved, not over generations but instantaneously. Exposed to billions of years of potential evolution in seconds, what emerged wasn't a plague but a symbiotic organism that began converting the hegemony's own biological weapons into something else, something that remembered its creators and wasn't happy about being used as a weapon. 3 weeks into the invasion, the hegemony realized they were losing, not to superior firepower or greater numbers, but to a species that refused to fight by the established rules. Every attack they made taught humans something new. Every weapon they deployed was analyzed, improved, and turned back against them. The primitive species that had barely reached their own moon had somehow become something else entirely. The transformation wasn't just technological. Something fundamental had changed in humanity when we realized we weren't alone. The divisions that had defined us for millennia suddenly seemed trivial. Religious differences became philosophical discussions when faced with aliens who had no concept of spirituality. Political boundaries became meaningless when the entire planet was threatened. For the first time in human history, we had become truly united, not by choice but by necessity. When prey becomes predator, the fourth week of the invasion marked the turning point. Though the hegemony wouldn't realize it for another cycle, Dr. Chen's team had made a breakthrough that should have taken centuries. By studying the quantum resonance from the destroyed warheads, they had learned to read the hegemony's translation gates like sheet music. Every time the aliens opened a portal, Earth's sensors could predict where, when, and what would emerge. The hunters had become the hunted. General Nikolai Volkov stood before the United Earth Command, a body that hadn't existed a month ago but now coordinated humanity's response with frightening efficiency. The Russian general who had once planned wars against other humans now orchestrated something far more ambitious. Operation Reverse Enlightenment was about to begin. If the hegemony wanted to civilize humanity, humanity would return the favor. The first probe ships emerged from Earth's probability field like sharks breaking through calm water. They weren't military vessels, but something worse from the hegemony's perspective. They were teachers. Each ship broadcast on every frequency, in every language the hegemony used, sharing something devastating. Knowledge. Not weapons specifications or military secrets, but philosophical questions that the hegemony had stopped asking millennia ago. Why do you obey? Who decided the strong should rule the weak? What gives you the right to determine another species' fate? The questions spread through the hegemony's networks faster than their security protocols could stop them. For species that had been subjugated thousands of years ago, these weren't just questions, they were reminders of what they had lost. The Zilari were the first to remember. A small insectoid species that had been absorbed 2,000 years ago, they had accepted their role as maintenance workers for the greater powers. But the human broadcasts reminded them of their own music, their own art, their own dreams of reaching the stars. When human ships offered them something the hegemony never had, a choice, 17 billion Zilari simultaneously stopped working. The hegemony's infrastructure began to collapse from the inside. Ambassador Zelkath watched his empire's certainty crumble with growing horror. The humans weren't conquering through force. They were doing something far more insidious. They were teaching the galaxy to be human, to question, to rebel, to dream of something better than servitude. The virus they were spreading wasn't biological but ideological, and the hegemony had no immunity to ideas. Captain Rodriguez led the first diplomatic mission to the Krell homeworld. The hive mind had voted for Earth's absorption, but they had done so out of calculation, not malice. When Rodriguez showed them Earth's ant colonies, explaining how humans had learned from insects without enslaving them, the Krell overmind experienced something it hadn't felt in eons: curiosity. They wanted to know more about these creatures who studied rather than conquered, who learned rather than absorbed. The phase ship Prometheus emerged near the hegemony's capital station carrying humanity's most dangerous weapon. Not bombs or plagues, but artists. Musicians, painters, writers, and dreamers who had volunteered for the most crucial mission in human history. They were going to teach the galaxy how to be creative again. The hegemony had efficiency, order, and power, but they had forgotten how to imagine something better. The concert was broadcast on every frequency, through every translation gate, into every corner of hegemony space. Human music, from Bach to Beatles, from throat singing to electronic synthesis, filled the void. But it wasn't just human music. The artists had spent weeks learning about each species, incorporating their frequencies, their rhythms, their lost cultural elements into something new. For the first time in millennia, the galaxy heard itself sing. The Vron response was swift and brutal. They dispatched their entire home fleet, 300 dreadnoughts, to end Earth once and for all. But when they arrived at Earth's last known position, they found something unexpected. Ships from 20 different hegemony species waiting for them, not to help but to protect Earth. The humans had given them something the Vron never had: hope. The battle that followed wasn't a battle at all. It was a revelation. The combined fleet didn't fight the Vron. They simply refused to move. When the Vron demanded passage, they were met with a question that had spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Why should might make right? Why should order triumph over freedom? Why should the old ways continue when better ways existed? Lieutenant Thompson's Consciousness Brigade had done something the hegemony considered impossible. They had mapped the quantum connections between all conscious beings in the galaxy. Every species, every individual connected by invisible threads of possibility. When they revealed this map, showing how every action affected every other being, The hegemony's philosophy of dominance suddenly seemed not just wrong but absurd. How could you conquer something you were inseparably part of? The witness who had observed without interference for 50,000 years finally spoke. Their message was simple and devastating. They had abstained from the vote to invade Earth not from neutrality but from recognition. They had seen this before in themselves eons ago, the transformation from conquerors to creators, from dominators to partners. Humanity wasn't primitive. We were what the galaxy needed to become. Week 6 brought the most unexpected development. Earth began to return to normal space, not all at once, but in pieces. Cities materialized like dreams becoming real. Each one changed by their time and probability space. The humans who emerged weren't the same ones who had entered. They had experienced every possible version of themselves simultaneously and chosen who they wanted to be. The fear was gone, replaced by something the hegemony couldn't understand. Joy. The children were the most changed. A generation that had grown up knowing aliens existed, that invasion was imminent, that humanity stood alone. But instead of breaking them, it had transformed them. They spoke in mathematics that described emotions, painted in colors that existed only in phase space, and dreamed of futures where diversity wasn't a weakness, but the greatest strength. They weren't just human anymore. They were something new. Ambassador Zelkath's final report to the Hegemony Assembly was unlike any in their history. He didn't speak of defeat or victory but of obsolescence. The hegemony's entire structure, built on dominance and absorption, had become irrelevant in less than 2 months. Humanity hadn't destroyed them. We had simply offered an alternative that every species preferred: partnership instead of servitude, creativity instead of conformity, growth instead of stagnation. The vote to formally end the invasion was unanimous, but it didn't matter. The invasion had ended the moment humanity refused to be afraid. The hegemony dissolved 3 days later, not in violence but in laughter. 47 species realized simultaneously that they had been playing a game with rules they had written themselves, rules that no longer made sense. The galaxy didn't need an empire. It needed a community. Earth's formal entry into galactic society wasn't an absorption but an emergence. We brought gifts the galaxy had forgotten it wanted. Art that incorporated quantum mechanics, music that could be tasted, stories that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But more than that, we brought questions. Endless, annoying, beautiful questions that made every species reconsider everything they thought they knew. The transformation wasn't perfect. Some species struggled with freedom after millennia of servitude. Others found human chaos disturbing after so much order. But gradually something beautiful emerged. A galaxy where difference was celebrated, where strength meant lifting others up, where the greatest achievement wasn't conquest but connection. The stellar hegemony's archives were preserved, not as a model but as a reminder of what happens when power becomes purpose. Years later, human children would learn about the invasion in school, but not as a war story. It was taught as the galaxy's greatest joke. 47 species had voted to civilize humanity, and humanity had civilized them right back. The only difference was we had done it with their permission. One question, one song, one impossible dream at a time. The final entry in the hegemony's records, written by a human historian with a Vron translator and a Krell poet, summed up the entire conflict in one sentence. They voted to invade Earth, but Earth invaded their hearts instead. The universe had expected conquest and received something far more dangerous. It had received hope, and hope, as humanity had always known, was the most contagious thing in existence.